Welcome back from break on the Heart of Sports. Jeff, let's keep the football talk going. And as the season starts, we're going to talk about how we got here, looking at a new book by John Eisenberg called Rocket Men, the Black Quarterbacks Who Revolutionized Pro Football. John, thanks for giving us a little time on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
3 years in the making. Why was now the time to tell this story?
Well, I think number one, I'm in Baltimore and have written for various media here for many years, and this is where Lamar Jackson landed, 2018. It was really interesting to follow a guy who, coming out of college, was told at the combine. Maybe it was a scout for the Chargers that said, you're gonna run the 40 because you sure would make a nice wide receiver in the pros. And he winds up barely getting drafted in the first round, and his second year he's MVP in the league. I mean, it's an arc not unlike Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia, and so you just see this going on and on. I mean, this is my 11th book. I've been writing sports for over 40 years. Race has been a constant thread, a narrative in my books, in my columns. And so you add Lamar on top of that, just right in front of me. And I thought, this is a big story. It's a big canvas. But I think it's really interesting that, 100 years into the NFL, and 57 years into the Super Bowl era, it took for two black starting quarterbacks. How did that happen? How did we get here? And I don't think there's anything wrong with, there's been enough trouble with getting the accurate history rolled out in today's America, I will say. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, hey, this is something that happened. There were a lot of issues for blacks at the quarterback position for many decades in the NFL. Let's tell that story and make sure that people understand this did happen. And maybe it's better now in some respects, but let's not forget what happened before.
So how, you mentioned how did that happen? So the obvious question to you is, how did it happen? As somebody who watched football in the 70s and saw the evolution of the black quarterback and saw Warren Moon play and saw Doug Williams play, what was it about that era that led to the understanding that anybody could play quarterback?
Well, what happened was a couple people in the league finally said, I mean, it was baked into the DNA of pro football that you didn't use black quarterbacks. There were none. Marlon Briscoe started 5 games for the Denver Broncos, not in the NFL, by the way, in the AFL in 1968. And after that, there was nobody. And so in the real history of the sport, there'd just been nothing. So what it took was a few people saying, I am not going to buy sort of the myths that existed, many of which were just racist. That's the only way to put it. That a black quarterback maybe wasn't smart enough to have that position in the pros, or he couldn't lead, he didn't have discipline. There was all this stuff. You go back and, some of the young scouts from that era will tell you that's what they heard from the old scouts back in that era. So what it took was a few guys in the league just saying, I'm not buying it. I mean, it has to start somewhere. You remember the coach Chuck Knox, okay? Nice coach in the 70s, is known for a lot of other things. Well, in the mid-70s, as coach of the LA Rams, he looked at his quarterback group and said, James Harris is the guy I'm going to put on the field. I don't care that he's black. And he put him out there and was in the NFC Championship game twice with James, who's really the first guy to get any sort of chance. And so it took guys like that. It took Joe Gibbs, not as the coach of the Redskins years later, but as the offensive coordinator in Tampa. They told him we can draft anyone we want. They were really bad in the late 70s, and they scouted a few guys. He went down to Grambling, talked to Doug Williams, and he came back and he told him, you need to draft this guy. This guy is going to be a winner in this league. He can do the job. I don't care what all the other stuff is. And so it took guys like that just sort of opening the door. And then it took those players proving that all those myths were wrong. I mean, James Harris, Doug Williams, Randall Cunningham in Philadelphia, proving that, yes, a black quarterback can play and win in the NFL.
I'll get to Randall in a little bit. He was one of my favorites. That was like my wheelhouse of growing up with football. But you mentioned James Harris, and he was somebody you got time with, and you write about in the book, and there was some stuff in there. He had no contract. He was in Buffalo at the start, and the team gave him a job cleaning his teammates' cleats. This is the guy that became the starting quarterback for the Rams. There were no black quarterbacks at the time. He was in the AFL before the merger. Can you talk about, you had said that it was sort of understood and baked in that they couldn't be quarterback. Can you talk about some of those hurdles? We talked about the people who gave them opportunities, but what were the actual hurdles that they were facing that you found out there?
Well, the hurdles, you really veer off into, a serious discussion, of race in America and what white perception of black was, and not always, obviously, I'm very hesitant to paint with a broad brush here, obviously, because the late 60s, the civil rights era, and there was an awful lot going on. And a lot of young African Americans in particular were pushing back against a lot of this stuff. At that era, and that's a really important part of it, that's where a lot of the pushback started. But the hurdles were the preconceived notions, that so many people had. And, it's sad to say, and I've got this in my book with, a couple people that were not in sports. Lloyd, it was true in other parts of society. You're talking about black leadership. Would white America give black leadership? It was true in the law. It was true in business. There were no CEOs until I believe it was the 80s. The first Fortune 500 CEO in the military. There was also very, very slow to evolve in that. So the hurdle was really the belief in, and there's no doubt in the NFL, it is it's a white power structure. It still is for the most part, and very slow to say that to put a black person in a leadership position, it was actually in keeping with a lot of other realms of American society.
How important was Warren Moon to the development and trust in black quarterbacks? Warren Moon didn't even start his career in the NFL. He started in the Canadian Football League.
Undrafted he just won the Rose Bowl at the University of Washington, and he did not get drafted. Very typical of that era. A lot of, the draft was not a pretty place for black quarterbacks. So he goes to Canada. He wins 5 Grey Cups. He's almost immediately the player that he would become in the NFL, and just dominates that league. And he does come to the Houston Oilers in 1984. He is the only black starting quarterback in the NFL. Doug Williams had spent 5 years in Tampa at that point and had basically been run out of town, was out of the NFL. He was playing in the USFL. And so Warren Moon was it. So I don't think you can stress enough what Warren Moon did, because he comes back to the NFL. There's a bidding war, and he's the highest paid player in the league. Suddenly, a black quarterback out of nowhere. No one saw that coming. Warren certainly didn't see it coming. And from the get-go, the Oilers were not good for a few years, but they gave him a leash and they let him play. And from the get-go, he was what he would become, which was very cool in the pocket with a great arm, the ability to evade pressure, run, and just a pro's pro, cool in the saddle. And so a great player. And then the Oilers got good, and he had an incredible career that lasted into the 2000s, and he threw for almost 50,000 yards, and he's in the Hall of Fame. He's the only black quarterback in the Hall of Fame. So just for year after year, Warren Moon just if you were looking at the NFL or the quarterback position from a racial perspective, Warren Moon was like a one-man gang, which was, those stereotypes are wrong. All you have to do is look at me, because I can play this position in the NFL. I can win. And so, he and to this day, he is still sort of carrying the torch. Anything that happens, he is the first guy to step up and speak out about things that he doesn't think are right.
Jeff and I talked earlier in the show about sort of the state of college football, and I'm curious your thoughts on the role that college football has played in both perpetuating the problem and then changing the NFL now to create opportunities. At first, they weren't really preparing mobile quarterbacks for the NFL style. So you had these very talented black quarterbacks who were not in a pro style offense. Now, all of a sudden, you fast forward, we're in the NFL, and the traditional, quote, pro style offers more mobile quarterbacks. Watching the game last night, you've got Patrick Mahomes with a run-pass option having to decide everything. So it used to be they didn't have the intellect, quote, to do it. And now the game has moved to they're so well prepared for it because of how they've played coming up.
Yeah, that's a key part of the story. It's a really interesting part of the story. Obviously, it's all about race. That part of it is a little bit less about race because it is about the evolution of football in some respects. And yes, what's really interesting about it is college football influenced the NFL. You would think the NFL, the greatest form of football in the world, they decide everything, right, about what should be prevailing styles and everything. But no, in this case, they were very slow for years and years, decades. The drop back passer is all they wanted. The drop back passer is what won Super Bowls. Everybody wanted that. And if you were mobile, it was actually held against you for the most part, just a few outliers. They didn't want you running. The linemen didn't like it. The coaches didn't like it and everything. So it finally started, college football started to change for sure and bring in more of the run pass option and, not just the college option that came out of the 70s and the 80s, actual pass and run options. Donovan McNabb in Philadelphia was another one who was good at that coming out of college. And so what finally changed, the NFL changed, and it bubbled up from college, no question. You see it in the generation that landed in the NFL in 2011 and 12 with Cam Newton, Colin Kaepernick as a young quarterback, an unbelievable player, and then Russell Wilson and Robert Griffin III. You've got four guys in a 2-year span that came in. They were all like that. They were mobile. They could still throw. They could lead. They could do everything. And the NFL, I think, finally said, we are not going to take these guys and make them drop back quarterbacks. We're going to change our offense to let them do what they do best. And from that point forward, 2011 and 12 to where we are now, you've seen a real evolution in the position. Not so much before that, Michael Vick a little bit, but since then, a real change. And that has definitely helped the black quarterback. A lot of them come out of college. They're now what they're playing in college is what's happening in the pros. And so, yes, as you said, they are uber prepared for it. And it's just, and as a result, a lot of times, look what we're seeing. 3 out of the first 4 picks in the last draft, black quarterbacks. So the situation has changed, and it's changing dramatically for the better. And the style of football, I think, has a lot to do with it.
In reading your book, one of the things it didn't necessarily surprise me and made me sad was that it doesn't seem like quarterbacks have changed over the years, or that anything happened with black quarterbacks that changed. It just seems that perceptions change. Is that one of the things that you took out of researching the book?
You are so right about that. and perceptions changed. And the other thing, that's changed. Yes, perceptions have changed. It's totally key. What they're capable of doing, they haven't changed at all. Opportunity is what is changing. My book, to me, is a story of opportunity. You can go back to the very first modern black starting quarterback, Marlon Briscoe, plays for the Broncos, 5 games in the late 60s. He starts. It's in some respects not much different than Lamar Jackson 50 years later. It's skill set that's not coming from a Power 5 school. He was at the University of Omaha, even smaller than Lamar at Louisville. He's got a lot of talent. He can run. He can throw. There's a lot of doubts about him. The skill set is a little out of keeping with what the norms are, quote unquote, in the NFL. Gets a chance as a rookie and he shines. That's the same story for Marlon Briscoe and Lamar Jackson. 50 years apart. What happens to Lamar is that the Ravens say, we like what we see. We're going to change our offense. We're going to make you the starter, and you're our guy. And in his second year, he wins the MVP award. What happened 50 years earlier to Marlon Briscoe is the Broncos said, you're never going to play quarterback again. They had quarterback meetings after the season. And so that was a fluke. All our white quarterbacks got hurt. You're out. And they didn't even invite him to quarterback meetings. And he had to change teams and change positions to have a career. So to me, that shows you that the talent, as you said, it's not a lot different than what's gone on. It's 50 years apart. It's about perception and opportunity.
I don't know that reading before this book and even talking this interview that I recognized the role that Philadelphia played in the steps along the way here. I mean, if you look at it, you had Randall in the 80s and early 90s with Buddy saying, let Randall be Randall. He wasn't going to try to force him into the stereotypical quarterback. Then we draft Donovan and it changes the perception. He's a top pick and he is not, while he ran, he was a pocket quarterback who could run. Then you fast forward and we had Michael Vick, but it wasn't the Michael Vick experience. It was the Michael Vick reclamation project. And now we have the next step with the first black quarterback in the Super Bowl with Jalen Hurts here. Can you just talk about some of the quarterbacks we've seen come through here?
I would say Philadelphia is at the right at the top of the pivot points in this story. The Eagles, it's great what's happened in Philadelphia over the years is the willingness to not bend or to not give in to stereotypes, and certainly started with Randall. And actually, I quote in the book a historian out of Chicago, a fellow by the name of Jack Silverstein, who did an unbelievable deep dive into this, the story of black quarterbacks from the numerical perspective. What teams have played, how many guys, numbers, percentages over the years of starts, and the Eagles are at the top, right at the top. And some of the realizations that he made, what came out of his study, his point was that what was good for. There's some franchises where it's just been very slow to happen at all for different reasons, but in the ones where they went to a black quarterback relatively early and had success, have been much more open to going back to black quarterbacks. The Eagles would be Exhibit A with Randall Cunningham after he played and had a great decade there. I mean that was no longer an issue.
We had Rodney,
who's the quarterback that we want, and so they've gone back to that numerous times. And that's great. I mean, there's a long legacy of good black quarterbacks in Philadelphia, and they're all good quarterbacks. So that's what's in. Hurts, goodness knows where he's going to go. He looks tremendous, and of course, as always, the little part of you wonder whether things are still going on. A second-round draft pick, so you wonder whether franchise quarterbacks. I mean, there's a lot in my book about draft and perceptions, and so many good guys that didn't go in the first round. Dak Prescott, fourth-round draft pick, from the very beginning has been the man in Dallas, however many years. The stories like that are not uncommon. So, but it's certainly the Eagles have been right at the top of the teams that have really been at the forefront of this of changing the perceptions.
All right, for those that are listening on the radio, they can't see that you're wearing a purple shirt. So I'm assuming that's Ravens related, but you have some Philadelphia ties yourself. You went to Penn and were lucky enough to be there during a pretty exciting period in Penn basketball. How did you get your start, and how did you develop this love of passion of telling the stories of sports?
Well, you are right. I was at Penn in the late 70s, and it's my year. Class of 79 that went to the Final Four. I was there for the Daily Pennsylvanian, and we came up a little short against Michigan State, and I think by about 40 points. But anyway, they did make the Final Four, and so a great thing. Those are my classmates, Tony Price and all those guys, and so that was a great experience for me. I had a great time, needless to say. It was a wonderful school, the Daily Pennsylvanian. I worked with Rich Hoffman, who wrote columns for forever in Philadelphia, and there's a bunch of us out and about still doing stuff. So that was a great experience for me. And, I got into journalism after that in Dallas, which is my hometown. So I was 5 years at the Dallas Times-Herald, and then I came to Baltimore, and they hired me at the Baltimore Sun. I was there for years, and for 27 years, I believe it was, wrote thousands of columns. And along the way, I started writing books. I just enjoyed that. I took that on as a challenge. My mother owned a bookstore growing up. I was a reader. I was an English major. I wanted to write books. So really have had two rails of writing for a number of years. This is my 11th book. And so I've stayed at it, writing a lot of sports history, narrative nonfiction, and I've been very fortunate. There's a lot of people that write. It's hard to get good contracts, good publishers, and get people to notice. So I don't take it for granted. I'm always pleased when anyone wants to talk to me about these books because that's it's an honor, really, to put something out there and have people pay attention to it.
Well,
you've covered so many different sports. You've covered World Series. You've covered, Kentucky Derbies, things like that. Where does going to a basketball game at the Palestra rank?
Oh man, right at the top. The Palestra in its heyday. I was a little kid from Dallas, Texas. It came up to Philadelphia in 1975, the fall of 1975, the first Big Five doubleheader at the Palestra. I didn't even know what was going on. It was Penn against somebody, and then it was Villanova and St. Joe's in the nightcap. And the place was packed. And of course, a great rivalry in the Big Five, those two. And it was just madness in the Palestra, and just 2 hours of screaming. I can't remember the game. I just remember the crowd. And I thought, this is like the most amazing thing I've ever seen. That, it was just so intense and passionate. And, the Palestra was, it was just an incredible historic place to watch a basketball game. The fact that they're still playing there was incredibly cool. And, I have many memories of some great games that Penn played there against some really, really good teams. And so I just think it's a fan. Years later, I made sure my son, sports loving, when he was in high school, I said, one night I packed him in the car, said, we're going to drive up to Philadelphia. We're going to see Penn play Temple. And he looked at me. I said, we're going to do it. And so we sat behind one of the baskets. He loved every minute of it. It really is quite the experience.
We're glad that Philadelphia could prepare you so well for this journey, telling all of these different stories. Our listeners can purchase the book, Rocket Men, The Black Quarterbacks Who Revolutionized Pro Football, anywhere books are sold. John, so great to get some time with you to talk about this continuing journey.
My pleasure. I loved it. Thanks very much.